All right, good morning, everyone. It's Friday. It's always a good day. So we're covering Chapter 2 today. It's Personnel, Security, and Risk Management. Okay? So, just kind of talking about what we're going to be discussing. A bunch of policies, risk management concepts. I got a worksheet. Patrick has them. He's passing them out for me. Thank you, Patrick. We'll be talking about social engineering as well as SETA just a little bit. All right. So the first thing, we have an organization. An organization, you can think of it as a collective of people. And when we talk about people, there's a really important concept that comes along with it that relates to security. It's the idea of autonomy. So, when you think about it, no one really tells you what to do. You can have policies, and you can be told what to do, but what I mean by no one tells you what to do is, you can break that. You have the ability. Okay, free will, autonomy, whatever you want to call it. So from a security perspective, that's an important concept to understand because it means that you set all the policies, but there are still other safeguards you need to have in place beyond just saying this is what is correct to do. Okay? So, we talk about human resource management. It's an important concept in security as well. We have a job description. Why is that important for security? Well, it's pretty basic. Okay? It goes back to the idea of role-based access control. Based on a job description, you can begin to sort of make these different roles that users may have, and that allows them to have the principle of minimal access. You're not providing them more access than is needed. Okay? Then beyond that, obviously, a job description should allow you to hire the best candidate for that position. Okay? Another important thing with security as it relates to humans, you want to make sure that you're doing proper screening and hiring processes. Okay, pretty self-explanatory here. But depending on the position, there may be more or less involved. Let's face it, a fry cook at McDonald's probably has a less stringent review process than, say, a Supreme Court nominee. Is that fair to say? Why? So they're different jobs, If you hire a bad fry cook, is it going to take down the entire McDonald's corporation? No. Okay, if you hire a bad CEO for an organization, could that take down the entire organization? Yes, and it has many times. Okay? In general, you may want to consider doing some of these, a background check, certainly obviously a reference check, education verification. Someone claims to have a degree, verify it. Okay? Several ways to do that. Have an official transcript is certainly one. Another way, of course, would be to call the school and do the verification process that way. Okay? And security checks. It's going to be more applicable to government jobs, although some other positions may require something similar. Now, there may be additional checks as well. So, for instance, a lot of organizations, if you're going to be touching their money in any way, they may require that you have a credit check performed. Okay? That's not uncommon. That's totally legal. There's nothing illegal. Well, let me rephrase that. In most jurisdictions, there's nothing illegal about that practice. Okay? Not legal advice or anything. But that's stuff to consider. And then lastly, check a candidate's social media profile. Okay? That can tell you a lot. Would you want to hire someone for a security position if they posted online their password, for instance? Why not? Well, not trustworthy maybe, but does that show good judgment? Is that likely that they understand the basic concepts of information security? So stuff to consider. Okay, there's a lot more you can talk about with social media. It's not an HR class, okay? So onboarding. There's a lot of processes involved in that. Again, it's not an HR class. We're talking about IT. So the onboarding process is basically where you're going to sort of introduce IT to the employee. Okay, a lot of times it's going to be basic training. We're going to talk about security education a little bit. Acceptable use policy. What can you do with company-owned technology? That's important to know as an employee, is it not? What do they allow? What do they not allow? Okay. How do you contact IT with any questions? What kind of questions are acceptable? That sort of stuff. It's all going to be covered in onboarding. Okay. Obviously, you have a new employee. Most likely, they're going to need to have some sort of account. Maybe it's an email-only account. Maybe it's a full AD account. You know, whatever. Okay. Then you also may want to consider, you know, some sort of contractual agreement. I have up here a non-disclosure agreement, although that's certainly not the only type of agreement you may want to use. It's going to be heavily dependent upon the position. Okay. And it's common sense. I don't think we need to go a whole lot into it. Humans, talking about oversight. Okay, so let's say we have an employee working for us. We want to ensure they're not putting our organization in a potentially bad position. Okay? So, gets into some stuff with ethics. But again, we're not going to cover this stuff with ethics. I think we covered that last semester. Okay, so firewalls. You know? Is it possible to see every action that a particular user or group of users does on a network? Is it possible? Is it likely to happen? Yeah, incredibly likely. Okay? See what they're doing on the computer itself. You know? What's the difference between spyware and, I don't know, remote support technology? Consent, right? Okay? So when you are an employee of a company, you are using their devices, you consent. You know? Fort Lewis can't install anything on my laptop, my personal laptop sitting right there, but I have their laptop in my office. It's theirs. Okay? They can install whatever they want on that laptop, but not mine. Does that make sense? User behavior analytics. Okay, what are users doing? And this isn't just to, you know, see if people are doing stuff wrong. Maybe you want to see what sort of stuff people are doing. There's lots of reasons for this, okay? Oversight is definitely going to be an important thing. All right, let's say you got to fire someone. Okay, this is something you're likely to be involved with at some point in your career, hopefully not on the firing end, hopefully not being fired, but, you know, at some point, you may be involved in the offboarding process where someone is terminated, okay? So that could be laid off, it could be fired for poor performance, it could be fired for a lot of reasons, all right? And in general, okay, I would recommend against going into any specifics. Okay? Because if you tell someone I'm firing you for this reason, that could be a problem, right? So let me rephrase that, okay? Because I don't want it to appear as though I'm saying to never tell anyone why they're being let go. I'm saying if you're letting them go for a non-legal reason, then you shouldn't disclose that. Does that make sense? Okay? Because for stuff like unemployment, let's say you fire someone for never showing up to work. Okay? Do you want that person to receive unemployment and have your company's unemployment premiums rise? Obviously you don't, okay? So that's not what I'm saying. I'm saying in an at-will employment state where either side can end employment at any time with or without notice, then if you were to hypothetically get rid of someone for a non-legal reason, which obviously I'm not saying you should, but if you were to, you shouldn't tell the person that. Does that make sense? Is anyone confused by that? I'm not advocating firing for illegal reasons. I'm just saying don't disclose an illegal reason. Okay, making sure that's clear. So obviously you have their account. Best practice to disable it, not necessarily completely remove it, because there may be information that may be needed from that account, and you disable it. Okay, that way no one can log in with it, but it's still there, all the content is still there. Backup content as needed. Pretty self-explanatory if they have certain files and stuff. Same thing with passwords. Okay, if it's Active Directory, do you need to get that password from them? No. Why not? You can easily reset it, right? So for stuff that's not tied into Active Directory, you would probably need to retrieve those passwords if they're needed, okay? And there's a lot of legal recourse that states that employees or former employees must turn over passwords if asked, at least for many circumstances. So obviously, you'd want to consult with HR and or legal for further information. This class is not legal nor financial advice. Okay, and it's also best practice to do on a Friday afternoon. Okay, why? Why should you not fire someone on a Tuesday morning? Have you guys had a management class before? Why shouldn't you fire someone on Tuesday morning or Wednesday afternoon? Why Friday afternoon? Exactly right. Okay? So it's best practice to do it on a Friday afternoon because it's the end of the day, going into the weekend. Presumably, if it's a traditional office setting, probably not going to be open over the weekend. Going to have that cool off period. Okay? It's not a fun thing to talk about, is it? All right. Go over this a little bit. Get all this stuff back from them, anything they may have. Again, let's say someone is terminated, they have access to a company laptop. You have a legal right to your company laptop. Okay. Hypothetically, if you were to fire someone, they were to decline to return it, that's theft. Okay. So police can get involved in some cases. In some cases, it may be treated as a civil matter. Either way, company's laptop is the company's laptop. And that goes back to the acceptable use policy. Obviously, you want to have a clause in there saying, this is our company device, you're agreeing to return it upon end of employment. Okay, something to that effect, obviously. All right, you want to have a compliance policy. I'm just going to outline what happens if a policy is broken. So most of the time, it's going to start off with a warning, okay? It wouldn't make a whole lot of sense to start off with termination for violating a policy, unless it's a particularly egregious violation, okay? Because if you think about it, let's say someone, makes a little device to wiggle the mouse. So your company has a policy saying that screens are locked after 5 minutes of inactivity. Someone doesn't like that policy, so they make a little device to wiggle the mouse. Okay? So that would be a violation. Should you fire someone for that violation? Who says yes? Who says no? Who says maybe? Okay? So why would you not fire someone for that? First time offense. Yeah. What about, this is really common in a hospital setting where you have a doctor who has a station and has a nurse wiggle the mouse. Okay? That's a violation of policy, right? That's sensitive information. You're going to fire the doctor. Why or why not? And when I say doctor, I'm talking about medical physician. Well, let's just say a nurse, he informs the nurse to wiggle the mouse and prevent it from going to lockout, He knows the policy. He or she knows the policy of inactivity, yeah. Okay, certainly one perspective. Let's say it's a repeated thing. The physician has been informed, by doing so, certainly violating the policy because the policy is inactivity. He's not at the station for a period greater than 5 minutes, therefore it should lock automatically. But it doesn't. Found a workaround. It's done this multiple times. Okay? It's going to be in the compliance policy. Now, having said that, it may make sense, and again, not legal advice, might make sense to have a range of potential punishments and consequences. Because it's very rigid, and you don't do it for one person, but you do it for another person, that could be lawsuit material, right? Okay? So again, not legal advice, but personal advice is to write your contracts and policies very carefully to allow you with enough leniency and freedom to respond to different circumstances in a reasonable fashion. Having said that, let's say you have someone you don't like. Okay, no one in the company likes this person. Everyone wants to get rid of them. Then, as soon as you find them doing something, could you use that as grounds for termination? Yeah, you can. Okay. Privacy policy requirements. This is both for employee and for customer. So obviously, it's just going to be a policy that's going to outline what information is collected, how that information will be used, and in some cases, why that information is collected and used. But for the most part, it's the what and the how. So, for instance, let's say we are an online retailer, and we are collecting information about orders. Obviously, we need to have information about orders if we're a retailer, right? Okay, is anyone confused by that? Let me know if that's confusing. But we're collecting that information. We can do a lot of stuff with it. We can choose to just use it to fulfill orders, or maybe we can use it for our internal advertising. Or even sneakier, maybe we could use that for external advertising. Okay? So we're selling that information. It's got to be outlined in the privacy policy. Pretty self-explanatory. All right, let's talk about risk management. So Patrick passed out a worksheet. So basically, we're going to go over the basics of risk management. So as an organization, there's lots of things that could harm us. Okay, it could be a fire. It could be a flood. It could be a lightning strike. It could be an earthquake. Okay, maybe a tornado. So the idea behind risk management is that we assess the risks and we act appropriately to the best interest of our firm. Okay, and then depending on how the assessment plays out, we may choose to respond to the risk in some way. We'll talk about the different responses to that. Okay, so obviously we have organizational assets. Those are things that we value. Could be intellectual property, could be humans, could be a building. You guys know what an asset is. You're business students, okay? So obviously, we assign some valuation to the asset. This valuation could be replacement value, could be depreciated value, lots of different types of value, but in general, we're going to assign a value in some fashion. Okay, a threat is something that could harm an organization. Okay? An event is something that occurred. In this context, it's going to be something negative that occurred. All right, so a vector is how something negative may occur. So for instance, let's say, for whatever reason, I have a network with no firewall on it, and I think it's a good idea to have a Windows XP machine, no service pack, no updates on it. Could that be a vector of attack? Okay, yes, it obviously could. Okay, exposure is going to be basically the likelihood that may occur. Okay, then we have the risk. Okay, so the risk is going to be sort of taking that threat, how much damage is it going to do, multiplying it by how likely is it to do that damage. Okay, that's the risk. Is that clear to everyone? Okay, so safeguard is going to be a measure to protect against the risk and threat. Obviously, an attack is going to be the act of actively trying to cause damage in some way. Okay, and then a breach is going to be a loss of information in some fashion. So I have a little chart here from the book that just kind of goes over the different terms and how they apply. But in general, you need to make sure you know about risk, vulnerability, threat, and all those. Okay, so the book talks about qualitative risk assessment. You don't need to worry about that. What's more important is quantitative risk assessment, where we put dollar values on everything. Okay? This makes a lot more sense. So you start off, you assign an asset value. So you probably already have that done if you're a company. Then you have the exposure factor. Okay? So we're going to talk about exposure factor. But in general, it's going to be, how much damage will be done. Could be a percentage, could be a dollar amount. Then you're going to calculate single loss expectancy. That's going to say, we had this asset that was worth this much. If we have a 45% loss, it is now worth this much. Okay? Going to assess the annualized rate of occurrence. That's basically saying, in any given year, how likely is it this will happen? Okay, and we're going to do everything in annualized. Keep everything unit consistent. If we don't do that, we're comparing one unit to another unit. You can't do that. Okay? Then you're going to derive the annualized loss expectancy. Okay, so all you're doing there is you're taking the likelihood that something occurs, you're multiplying it by the amount of loss, and then you're getting that annualized rate of occurrence there. Okay? So we're going to do examples of this, but it's just kind of going over sort of how this works. Okay, and then finally, you're going to compare it to doing nothing. So you have the act of doing something, and you have the act of doing nothing. All right? So here's the terms again, just so we're all on the same page. We have the exposure factor, single loss expectancy, annualized rate of occurrence, annualized loss expectancy. So the exposure factor, loss potential. How much are we going to lose? Okay? Have the single loss expectancy. We're just taking the asset value, multiplying it by how much we're going to lose. That's how much the loss expectancy is for an event. Okay? You have the annualized rate of occurrence, how likely the risk is to occur. It's going to be expressed in a percentage. Most likely a pretty small percentage. Okay, then you calculate the annualized loss expectancy. Take the SLE, multiply it by the ARO, or if you didn't bother to calculate the SLE, take the asset value, multiply it by the expected times the annualized rate of occurrence there. All right, let's do some examples. Okay, so we're going to do these together. So, right now, I'm going to keep it nice and easy. The worksheet I passed out is a little bit more difficult. So we have a $5 million asset. We have a cost of occurrence of 2.5 million, and that leaves a residual value at 2.5 million. Okay? So just to clarify, a residual is basically the same as saying what's left over in the asset after something occurs. So you take the asset value, you subtract off the cost of occurrence, that's going to give you the residual value. Okay? Everyone with me so far? All right, so we have a likelihood of occurrence. Okay? I think the book calls it the ARO. Okay? So now we want to annualize the cost of occurrence. We know the cost of occurrence is 2.5 million, and we know the likelihood of it is 4%. Okay? So how are we going to calculate the annualized cost of occurrence here? What are we going to do? So we're going to multiply the cost of occurrence times the likelihood of occurrence. Okay, and that gives us $100,000. We expect that every year this will cost us $100,000. It's not saying that this will ever actually cost $100,000, but when we annualize out the cost, that's what we're going to receive. Because honestly, it's either going to cost 2.5 million, or it's going to cost nothing, right? There's a 4% chance it costs 2.5 million, and there's a 96% chance it costs nothing. Does that make sense? Okay. So, I'm just going to give you an annualized protection cost. Let's say that we can employ protection that costs $25,000, and let's say that it completely removes the cost of occurrence. Okay, so it's $25,000, a year plus $0 in the annualized cost of occurrence with the protection. Does everyone understand this? So what are we going to do? I made it up. Okay? What are we going to do? Why? Exactly. So the annualized protection cost is less expensive than the annualized cost of occurrence without protection. Okay? So, have a $5 million asset. In fact, let's go ahead and get rid of these two numbers. And the destruction percentage can be 85%. That means what? Okay, so if something happens, 85% of the 5 million is gone, right? Okay? So that means the residual value is going to be 1 minus 85%, right? It's what's remaining. Okay? So we're going to take this 5 million, we're just going to multiply it by 1 minus this 85%, which should give us, of course, 15%. And obviously that's going to give us $750,000. Okay? So I want to calculate the cost of occurrence. So I can do that a couple different ways, right? First way, take the asset value, subtract off the residual value. That will give me what's remaining in terms of the cost of occurrence. I could also, of course, take the 5 million, multiply it by the 85%. Okay? I think that's pretty self-explanatory there. So let's just do that. And of course, that gives us 4.25 million. Okay, so we have a likelihood of occurrence given at 5%. So how do we calculate the annualized cost of occurrence? So we know the cost of occurrence is 4.25 million. So we take that number and we multiply it by the likelihood, correct? Okay, that gives us $212,500. A little bit expensive. Let's compare that to the protection cost. So we have a protection cost of 1 million over 10 years. Okay, so how am I going to calculate the annual protection cost from that? That's exactly right. Okay, divided by the number of years. So we're just going to go ahead and call that $1 million divided by 10. Did I have the right number of decimals? No, I did not. Okay, $100,000. And again, we're assuming that this protection is going to completely eliminate the cost of occurrence. Won't always be the case. We'll see some examples where that's not the case. So, what are we going to do? We're going to have an annualized cost of occurrence. This, or we're going to go with this. Why? Less expensive. Okay. So, got another example here. Let's go ahead and get rid of these. Someone walk me through it. How do I calculate the residual value? So in this one instance, you're right, but you could also do 1 minus 50% in every other instance, and 1 minus the destruction percentage. So I'm going to do that just to be kind of consistent here. Okay, and for the cost of occurrence, how do I calculate it? That is correct. All right. What do I do here? Annualized cost of occurrence. That is correct. Okay, we have same sort of annual protection cost, million over 10 years. We know that's 100,000. Okay, so again, go with protection. All right. Everyone good with this so far? All right. So we have one final example. Let's see if I could get someone else to go through this with me. So, who wants to walk me through this? What do I do? 30%, just make sure we get that right. And now for cost of occurrence. Okay, that works as well. All right, annualized cost of occurrence. What am I going to do? Okay. So now we have protection cost of, is this $10 million? Yeah, it's $10 million. So that's going to be annualized protection cost of $1 million. Okay. So the annualized cost of occurrence with protection. Let's say the protection is not 100% effective. Okay, let's just assume that it still has, let's just go with a $10,000 annualized cost of occurrence with the protection. Okay, so now we want to add up these two, and that's going to give us 1,010,000, right? Okay, so which one are we going to do? We're going to do something, or are we going to do nothing? Accept the risk and do nothing. All right. So I passed out a worksheet. I'd like you all to pair up, maybe 2 or 3, work together on it. I'll give you guys about until 8:40, and then we will meet back and go over it. So it's about 8:40. I don't expect you to get done with that whole packet right now, but I'm going to go ahead and go over the first one, and then I'll post the answer key to Canvas eventually, and then you can sort of work through the others on your own time if you like. So I'm going to go ahead and go over this first one. So if I get a volunteer to read this off for us, who wants to read the problem to us? Go for it, Ron. Okay, so let's go through this. So looking at the problem, we know that the cost of occurrence is given at 800,000. Okay, and we also know the likelihood is given at once every 100 years, or 1 out of 100 is 1%, right? So for the annualized cost of occurrence, we just take the cost of occurrence, multiply it by the likelihood of occurrence. That gives us an annualized cost for doing nothing of $8,000. Okay, so there's a couple different costs with the protection. There's an initial upfront cost given at $250,000. We know it's going to last us for 25 years. So what we do is we take that initial upfront cost and we're going to multiply it by, or we're going to divide it rather by the 25 years, which gives us a lifespan operating cost of $10,000 a year. We also have, of course, annual operating cost of $10,000 a year. So you add up the costs together, and of course that's going to give you 500,000. Divide that by 25 years. That gives you 20,000 per year. Okay, is everyone with me so far? All right. So we also see that we have a new cost of occurrence. You know, fire suppression system doesn't get rid of fire, it just puts it out quicker, right? Okay. So it's not going to change how likely a fire is to break out. So that's given as $100,000 every 100 years. Take that 100,000, multiply it by the likelihood of occurrence. It's going to give you a new annualized cost of occurrence of $1,000. Okay. So you add up the cost of protection to the new annualized cost of occurrence. So you add 20,000 to 1,000. That gives you $21,000. Okay. So in the analysis part, since the annualized cost of occurrence is initially $8,000, less than the total annualized cost of protection, $21,000, Clearwater should do nothing. Does that make sense? Like I said, I'll post the answer key. I just want to go through the first one together. Any questions? All right. Very basic examples of risk analysis, but that's the gist of things. Okay, so the 4 major things you can do in the risk management process. The first one, ignore the risk. Okay, you guys have seen the, what's the bird that goes around and sticks its head in the sand? Is that the dodo bird? Which bird is that? Ostrich, okay? You're ignoring risk, you are an ostrich. Generally speaking, ill-advised. It's better to accept the risk. You're acknowledging the risk is there. You're not doing anything about it because it's not financially sensible to do stuff about it. That's a much better approach. Okay, you can transfer the risk. This is basically insurance. Okay, so for instance, you have a car. You drive the car. Your car may cause damage. You probably couldn't afford the damage the car caused, or at least you probably couldn't afford the damage that the car is capable of causing. That's a better way of putting it. What do? Do you not drive? No, you still drive. Do you say, who cares? Hopefully not. Do you say, I have enough money to pay for this? Well, you can't legally do that in almost any state. You purchase insurance, right? You transfer that risk to someone else. And lastly, mitigating the risk would be to have some sort of protective measure in place, or at least one protective measure in place. All right, so speaking of risk mitigation, here are some common types of protective measures you may use. You may use a physical control, something that's physically there to prevent some threat from transpiring. Okay, you may use a preventative control, something that's there to prevent. This can be both physical or technological, or really anything there. Its purpose is to prevent. Deterrent. It's very common for stuff like physical, where you use stuff like locks. You use stuff that is there to prevent a lot of opportunistic events from transpiring. Obviously, deterrent's not going to be 100% effective. Detective. It's going to tell you that something took place. So think about like an intrusion detection system. That is a detective risk mitigation device. Think about a security camera. It may act as a deterrent if it's visible, but it also acts as a detective, okay? Because it knows someone was there. You have that recording, presumably. But does it stop anyone? Okay? No. Compensating. Sort of getting into financial actions. Corrective. Maybe you have a Windows XP system with no patches. You say that is a silly thing to do in 2022, so you replace the system. That's corrective. Okay? Or if for whatever reason you had hardware that could run both Windows XP and Windows 10, then maybe you'd update to Windows 10 and run all the drivers. Whatever. You get the idea. Recovery. Got to be measures in place to aid in the recovery. And lastly, directive are going to sort of be overarching measures. So pretty self-explanatory there. All right, social engineering. The whole concept behind social engineering attacks is to exploit human beings. Okay? Hopefully no one in here likes to exploit human beings. All right, so some common examples. Phishing emails, or phishing messages, I should say. Someone impersonating an organization or person. Spear phishing is going to be targeted phishing attacks, where you have some amount of information about someone, you're trying to gather more. Whaling is whenever you go after a top executive or someone of high importance, maybe like a important political figure, something to that effect. And then smishing is basically just phishing over SMS. Or I wouldn't just limit it to SMS, I would say, sort of messaging services. Okay, so some different techniques they may use. They may pose as an authoritative figure, maybe like a police officer or something. They may impersonate that, try to get people to do stuff. May intimidate people. May try to get you to agree to stuff through little bits and pieces, forming consensus. That's certainly another approach. They may have some scarcity, limited time thing. They may try to build trust. And most likely it's going to be some sense of urgency. Okay? Maybe they have someone in the hospital or that they're claiming, something like that. Okay? So spam. Obviously, spam is going to be unsolicited messages of some sort. Shoulder surfing and eavesdropping. Pretty self-explanatory here. All we're doing is looking over someone's screen that we're not supposed to see. Okay, and then eavesdropping, of course, is listening in on a conversation we're not a part of. Okay, lastly, invoice scams. This is really a problem for an accounts receivable department where they have a invoice that they received that was not something that they purchased. Okay, if they pay it by default, that could be a big problem for them, right? Okay, a couple more social engineering attacks. Tailgating and piggybacking. Basically, it just means like you have a gated access and a car goes in behind another car. Dumpster diving could be a big problem if you were throwing out sensitive information. Someone could go in and take it. Okay, pretty self-explanatory. Identity fraud, I think you know what that is as well. Typo squatting, particularly a problem for things like domain registration, where there could be a commonly misspelled domain. Someone gets that common misspelling, and they basically use it to do whatever. Could be host malware, could be have a sort of phishing site, whatever. Okay, social media. I think there's a lot of problems with social media, people impersonating, catfishing, all that sort of stuff. All right, the last topic for today is SITA programs, okay? Security education training awareness programs, something to consider to require of your employees. These can be in place to sort of make sure that everyone knows basic security concepts. This can be pretty beneficial in many circumstances to just make sure that everyone has a basic understanding of your company's policies, directives, all that sort of stuff. All right, by the way, they're highly ineffective. Just kind of throw that out there. The research suggests that while they do reduce incidents, they don't get anywhere close to elimination of them. So don't rely on them for everything. Okay, kind of wrapping things up. We talked about basic personnel management from a security perspective. Talked about basic risk management concepts. Talked about social engineering, and we talked about SETA attacks. Like I said, I'm going to post the completed worksheet to Canvas. That way you can kind of check your work as you go. I'm not going to take that up or anything, but I think it would be good to do. All right? So with that said, have a great weekend. See you all Monday.